Welcome, everybody, to the Case for Construction Culture podcast. I'm Tom Esch, and I'm with Dylan White. Dylan is a regional water utility field safety specialist at a regional water utility. Did I say that right, Dylan?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm working at getting it right. And you've been doing that a long time. I think at least 10 years. You've been in that world doing safety, working hard at culture. And the reason I wanted you here is that I notice what you post on LinkedIn is interesting. And you care about people, you care about culture, care about communication. So this we're talking about safety on this podcast, and we're also talking about profitability or efficiency. I'm really interested in some of what you're doing with culture and how you're trying to empower everybody to own the role of safety, which is something many of us have been trying to do for a long time. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe we could just kick it off with some of the questions we've been mulling over here. What are you most excited about this year, Dylan? I know you're at a fairly large organization and you're at a fairly high level. And what excites you for what you're doing this year?
Yeah, so one of the things we've been working on for a while now is to try to pivot away from the general safety training. We've
Hmm.
done that for years where we would say, okay, what safety training do we have lined up for this year? And you'll have the typical, confined space, excavation,
Hmm.
do some crane training, do some flag or work zone training, the
Hmm.
typical stuff, but all those were still pretty general.
Hmm.
So none of them were tailored for us. And even further so, none of them were tailored for each department. So, for example, confined space is the general topic. We we are exposed differently in our water production department as we would be in our distribution department.
Hmm.
We address those a little bit differently just because of the exposure, and we train a little bit different because of the exposures are so different.
Hmm.
Um, and so we're trying to pivot away from that general list and say, let's just, come in and have somebody in here for an hour, or sometimes it's all day,
Hmm.
and trying to refine that and make the trainings more applicable not only to the utility as a whole, but more precisely, uh, more tailored for the work groups or even the people that can
Hmm.
differ within the organization. So doing that in-house is the ultimate goal, but building the capacity across the utility where we have more than one or two trainers to do that because we're so diverse in departments. Um, that's the challenge, but that's also the excitement is to
Hmm.
make training as best or as good as it can be, and tailored as good as it can be instead of just that check the box feel.
Sure. And you already jumped into my second question. You mixed them, which I like, because
Yeah.
oftentimes your greatest strength is also your greatest weakness or struggle. But what are some of the other specific challenges that you've seen or had? And we talked about the safety cop, we talked about integrating all this to get people to own it more, um, the pivot that you're trying to create in doing that. What are maybe define some of those challenges if you could, Dylan, that you're experiencing?
So kind of some of the story goes way back when I first got into safety, and how I got into safety. I didn't lose a finger, thankfully, or I didn't have something catastrophic happen.
Hmm.
But it was an opportunity to kind of stretch myself into something new. Obviously, new challenges too. So it was kind of a slower transition,
Hmm.
starting from previous employers. And at the time, safety was the safety person, rather, it was kind of seen as that safety cop where they're supposed to go out on a job site, find what's wrong, report
Hmm.
what's wrong,
Hmm.
and management would do with whatever based off of what you found was wrong.
Hmm.
And that's a starting point. It's far from where I thought it should be or could be.
Hmm.
So part of that transition was, well, I don't really like that approach. I don't like the safety cop approach, just to put a name to it.
Hmm.
How can we make it more personable? And if we're only counting negative things, wouldn't that just tie safety to everything negative? How do you count things positively? What are you seeing that's happening, that's working? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so trying to pivot away from the safety cop mindset more towards a internal consultant. Um, and part of the safety cop also came with the safety do mentality. And here's what I mean by that. The safety do mentality is just a label that I put on it where it's like, if we have a safety problem today, that is the safety person's problem or department's problem
Mm-hmm.
only. And if you're in operations, you just report that to safety, and safety takes care of all the problems that came with that.
Mm-hmm.
And you end up becoming a firefighter. It's
Mm-hmm.
putting out all these fires all over the place, and
Mm-hmm.
depends on how the organization is structured. That might work, but where it's really horizontal and a lot of different departments moving, that can be quite challenging,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you have, I mentioned a production department and a distribution department, all
Mm-hmm.
within the same company, but they just operate differently.
Mm-hmm.
So when you tackle a similar problem in both of those, you might need to tackle it differently,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, where was I going with that? And so the internal consultant is more to guide those departments towards the right answer. Because we have enough people to fix the safety issues or encourage the right behaviors or reward the right behaviors and acknowledge the successes. It's just a matter of if all of those people see that as part of their role.
Mm-hmm.
And across the safety industry, we've all heard it. Safety is everybody's job, and
Yeah.
that's absolutely true. But that pivot away from the safety do or the safety cop and trying that internal consultant is really about building capacity, which means that if we have enough people to tackle the issues, what sort of resources or coaching or encouragement do they need that each of those two examples can tackle it kind of how they need to,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and guiding guidelines being with OSHA and compliance and that sort of thing too. But you can have a little bit of leeway in there, that makes it a little bit more applicable to those different groups.
So, how would you define culture, Dylan? What is culture? Is this word that gets thrown around? Everybody's talking about safety culture. You don't want to be the cop. You want to get everyone to own it.
Yeah,
Safety do. You want to, but I think what
I
we're talking about is creating a cult. You're trying to continue to create the best work culture to make accidents least likely to happen and good things to happen with work. You don't want to just pick on the negative and report the negative back. That's the wrong way to do it. That doesn't work anymore. But how would you define culture in the context you're in there?
I'm gonna take us back to my early days when I started with the utility, and I started as a laborer, and every week each department has a weekly safety topic.
Mm-hmm.
And those are mostly ran by supervisors or management, or at least
Mm-hmm.
delivered.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I volunteered as a laborer, to give one of these weekly safety topics,
Mm-hmm.
through a presentation.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it on culture, right? And you kind of said it there. There's kind of two different languages you can use, and that's safety culture, and then you said work culture too. And I see it more of a work culture,
Mm-hmm.
to tackle it that way,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not a fan of having safety separated from the work,
Mm-hmm.
because then it's like it's an either or sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I want them together. And so
Mm-hmm.
I gave this presentation on culture, and at the end of it, somebody asked me, it was like, well, so are you saying we don't have a safety culture here? And what I was trying to say is, whatever your culture is, there's not a safety culture, and then there's not work culture.
Hmm.
And one of the things that comes with that, and I think it might often be overlooked, is just the language that we use.
Hmm.
And, you know, we've probably all seen the safety first signs too.
Hmm.
And that always kind of rubbed me wrong. It's like, well, it's not really safety first because, we're always trying to produce a product and we're always trying to have productivity and, money's always involved. And if safety was really, truly first, we would all be driving dump trucks or monster trucks because if we got hit, we'd be less likely to be injured. Right? Well, that's not happening. So there's always this trade-off, right?
Hmm.
And so we started to change the language that it's not safety first, it's people first, because that's what it's about. It's about
Mm.
people. And
Interesting.
even just with signage, our injury sign that we have out front that says how many injuries we have, how many accidents we have, that we threw the old one away, said safety first. We created a new one that says people first.
Hmm.
Also on that sign, we started to tally good things. Safety resolutions is the third number that we count on that sign. Safety resolutions, we want a lot of those. Means it's really showing our work that we are improving the workplace. And so
What's a safety resolution, Dylan? Excuse me. What?
so a safety resolution is a broad term that captures any sort of improvement, whether it's a response to an injury or an accident or an idea
Hmm.
or purchase of a new equipment because there's new safety aspects to that. It's really any sort of improvement that was brought up through other leading indicators
Hmm.
or lagging indicators for that matter.
Hmm.
But it's a one number that kind of just says this is how much has changed,
Hmm.
right? And is it perfect? Far from it. Uh,
Hmm.
but it's something positive to count.
Do you still have the hours or days since last injury on there, or do you
We
scrap
don't
that?
have that on the sign. Doing some research over the years, um, there's that old skit. I don't know if it was Mad TV or SNL where um, they had this manufacturing layout and these people had a clock on the wall. They said, okay, we got 5 minutes and then we get our pizza party. Right? Nobody gets hurt. And slowly over this, 5 minute skit, more people were getting hurt, more severe it was getting hurt. And they were just saying, well, suck it up. We got to have our pizza party. We got 2 more minutes. And I think that hours thing can do that. It doesn't do it in all cases, but the larger that number gets, the more pressure it would put on somebody to not report something if
Hmm.
in fact they were injured. And I don't want them to have pressure to not report. I would
Hmm.
much rather over-report injuries and incidences just because we can get it out on the table to resolve
Hmm.
it, versus saying, we've had 10,000 hours injury-free, and if there was an injury, they're just not going to feel great about it.
That's really interesting. Is there any data on that or studies that you're aware of, Dylan, with that? That's
I
fair.
couldn't cite any right now, but I do remember reading some um, OSHA articles that would say, when you do any sort of incentive things, that's kind of in the same realm.
Hmm.
You need to do that with pretty carefully.
Hmm.
Uh, Back to the pizza party, the silly pizza party example.
Yeah, that's a fun,
Just
that's a
because,
clever one.
and so, kind of back to the culture question, is that the language, that sort of thing matter? Um, when somebody reports something, how do you handle that? And so it's a custom. It's how people feel about reporting accidents and
Hmm.
injuries. It's their expectation with communication on what you do to resolve that. Back
Hmm.
to the safety resolutions. Um, it's all those things wrapped into one thing, and I think that's why it's such good topic for people to talk about because it's really kind of endless and it's super challenging. And so there's no right way or single way
Mhm.
to tackle that culture monster. But yeah, so a couple thoughts there.
Yeah, interesting. I love the what you're doing with the sign there is very unique. I've never heard of that actually. To not put the hours or the days, but to put the resolutions or the improvements on there and what we're doing to proactively. It sort of sounds like leading versus lagging indicator motivation for people, which is a big part of culture and defining. Sounds like you're defining the culture by the language. You mentioned language is so important, and what you post or talk about really does help shape the culture. And of course, what you allow then to happen or not allow also shapes the culture.
Yep,
Um,
absolutely.
how about the people like you are really influential for influencing outcomes, even though it's challenging and it's kind of mysterious. What can you do to most impact, behavior and improve culture and create, the people first idea is really interesting. You could have a sign maybe saying safety second,
Well, it
people first.
who was the gentleman? Dirty Jobs. Is
Yeah,
it
Mike
Mike Rowe? Yeah.
Rowe.
So Mike Rowe, he
Yeah, he
had
did a
that
good
safety
spin on
third.
that.
Yeah. So same ballpark there, but yeah, safety third. Um,
Yeah, safety third. It's crazy, but at least it gets people thinking and and Rowe is very honest. What you're saying is very honest and real. It's just assuming everyone's going to report every injury and every near miss and the pressure. You get 1 million hours. Some of these big companies have 1 million hours,
yeah.
and then some guy, cuts a finger with a box cutter and has to go get stitches. And
Well, and a good example that I had read about, and I think Peter Drucker had written about this, um, is that or no, it wasn't Peter Drucker, but nonetheless, it was about the Deepwater Horizon incident. Is that BP, they had really great safety record for a long time, and they had the hours that they would mark,
yeah,
1,000 hours, 100,000 hours, whatever it is. Um, and then the BP incident happened where a few people died, obviously catastrophic environmentally. But it sounded like digging into that investigation, a big investigation since the magnitude of that incident,
yeah,
and they started to find out that the culture wasn't reflective of that 1 million hours or 100,000
hmm
hours. Is that there were
yeah,
some underlying problems there, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But what I'd read is, safety is all great, and you can count the numbers until something really bad happens, and then you
hmm
can start to reflect in it and really see what's working and not.
hmm
Um,
yeah, interesting. Do you have a story as we're moving towards wrapping up here about an effort you helped to launch or create or shape to make some substantial changes in the culture that succeeded or maybe failed? I'm always more interested in the failures, like you just said, that the failure will cause
yeah,
you to reflect deeply. Nobody
I,
wants that. Nobody wants that, but sometimes it is a kind of a gift to the organization. Uh,
it is. I agree, and I've nobody tries to fail like you're talking about, but we're all humans, and I've come to give it your best and try something new. And if it fails, well, that's some information to work with. You try something different next time.
hmm
This was a couple years back. We were really trying to uh, roll out stretching and more of an ergonomic initiative. That's where
hmm
most of our injuries had been over the years. And so, how do you get a bunch of construction oriented guys to start stretching in the morning?
hmm
We kind of had a plan. We had tied in a local physical therapist too to help roll us this program out. He led us the day one, day two, we're trying to, be consistent with this thing. So me and one other supervisor, it's okay, we're leading this thing. Okay. We get up there, we do, 5 minute stretch, really kind of, not really asking, just saying, okay, like talked about this and here we go. Here's 5 minutes. And the session went just fine, right?
Hmm.
That day we thought it went fine. That night we thought it went fine. We thought we were good. We're on a great path. Well, the
Hmm.
next day we get word that it didn't go so hot.
Mm.
Everybody in there hated every second of what we were walking them through. So much so that there was talk of doing walkouts, right? We're a union organization here. Talk about doing walkouts because it was so poorly rolled out, so poorly led, and that was humbling, right? That was
Mm.
humbling.
Mm.
And so it kind of goes back to your point of, everybody in organizations and, obviously in safety, nobody wants people to get hurt. There's a ton of well-intended people out there,
Hmm.
but that's the easy part. Good intent
Hmm.
part.
Hmm.
Pulling it out is a lot tricky, especially dealing with different departments, different personalities. And in that case, we completely messed it. And so we're still struggling on that regard of, hey, these are our most injuries, sprains, strains, and how do we stay ahead of that stuff?
Mm.
We still do that, but what we had imagined in our head with that kickoff of stretching in the mornings just didn't quite take root.
Doesn't it seem so simple? I love the story, Dylan. I love the humility that you tell it with too. It seems so simple, maybe to you and I. And I think you have a background as an athlete, right? You played a lot of sports.
Yeah.
It's the simplest thing. Let's stretch. Me too. I was a college athlete, and I actually wanted to do this. I now need to send a thank you note to the guy who said to me, Tom, that's not going to work. I thought it was going to work, kind of like you and others. Hey, soft tissue injuries, back and neck and shoulder injuries, guys. Let's just stretch. I mean, these are like 80% of the injuries where I was working. Like no brainer. Let's stretch. And we were talking about it at one of the meetings, and the head guy, the top guy, said, "No, it is not going to work." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "No, these guys are not going to stretch." And then there was a guy at the committee. He said, Tom, I got a horrible shoulder. I got arthritis in my knee. It hurts me to stretch. I'm not stretching. And you're going to make me. And then we dropped the stretching. And
Yeah.
and this is what's interesting though, because you talked about how you rolled it out. How could you have rolled it out, do you think, Dylan, now knowing now what happened? Could you have done it differently to have gotten a different result? Do you think? And what would that have
I,
been?
I think so. And here's just one example of how we could have tackled it different is start a little bit more at the grassroots level. When anybody gets up in front and it starts telling you what to do differently, you're
Yeah.
going to have resistance in some form.
Yeah.
So kind of finding some buy-in and some internal leaders that could have championed it a little bit. That would
Yep.
give us a better shot.
Yep.
Um, it's funny, like you talked about the athlete background. Like me, I kind of would want somebody to set that up. And so just to give me a space to do the stretching versus doing it myself, because I don't really do it myself I'm not very good at doing it myself. Now, if you're
Yeah.
doing it as part of a group, it's a
Yeah.
little bit easier for me just to get involved and to
Me
do it.
too. Yeah, for sure.
And we were talking about soccer games and stuff. And this last week, I was doing a little bit of stretching before our
Yeah.
game that we had to
Yeah.
help coach. And one of the girls looked at me like I was crazy. She's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, there will be a day where you're going to stretch, not because you have to, or not because you want to, but because you have to." That's what.
It's gonna
So
prevent an
yeah,
injury.
that's where I'm at. But
Oh, I love it. I love it. And I don't want to brag in any way. And it wasn't me. Like I would have done what you did too. Like, let's just go. Let's stretch, guys. And then
yeah,
you think went well. That's really interesting to me. There was
yeah,
no feedback you could read, right? They,
yeah,
they hit it, but then they expressed later how unhappy they were and they felt, it came from the outside.
yeah.
this group I was working with, about a year and a half into a 3-year project, one of the foremen, who was already stretching every day anyway, started doing it with his crew. And he was well respected. And he was a big, strong, athletic guy. And he started doing the stretching. And then his crew was all doing it. And then it kind of just spread. And I think they even had some good results where their guys felt better. They somehow, even the tough guy culture, they admitted stretching was
Oh,
good. And then they told me recently that 98% of the guys are now stretching,
yeah,
which is a
nice.
huge shift. And the injury rate went down 70%. And maybe half of that is just because they're stretching. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't I don't know enough about ergonomics and stretching to know what the direct correlation, but you and I both know that's a good idea. If you got older guys, some macho
yeah.
culture, not always doing it the right way, and you're going to get fewer injuries if people stretch. But that was it's so tricky to take these tough male cultures and initiate changes, and especially physical sort of body. Okay, we're going to move now. Men in particular, very sensitive to moving in space around other men, right? Like they
Yeah.
just some feel very insecure.
Especially the dance floor, not happening.
There's
Right.
no ballet, no ballet happening in your business. Yeah, ballet. I mean, the football players doing the ballet, right? When that was big in the 70s,
Yeah, yeah.
80s, they started doing ballet and yeah, doing ballet in the public works world. That would be something, Dylan. You could make a name for yourself with that.
But you also
Dylan's
bring up
dance Dylan's dance team.
oh, yeah, right.
Now,
Injuries
now we
plummet.
got something.
Start
I love
dancing.
the story, Dylan. I love it. Is there any final thoughts you have about safety, about culture?
Well, one thing that came to mind when you were adding some comments about stretching is, um, everybody generally knows that stretching is good for you, right?
Yeah,
Now, I
proven.
feel better and you kind of feel a little bit better in the morning for the most part. You're getting the blood moving and
Yeah.
wakes you up a little bit. Sometimes people don't want that. But it goes back to, and if we know it's good, measuring if it's good might be really hard or really difficult or really messy or maybe even, impossible. It
Uh-huh.
doesn't mean that you don't need to do it still, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have that general consensus, which I think most people do,
Yeah.
then what's where are we tripping up? And in my case, it was how we rolled it out,
How you rolled it out had
right?
everything to do with it.
Yeah.
Totally. No, I'm with you. I'm stretching right now. I'm stretching my hamstring right now because I'm at my standing desk, and after several hours,
Oh
I'm
yeah, yeah,
to stretch my legs or walk or something. Well, Dylan, this has been good. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention to culture and studying what works and what doesn't work. I hope you and I can keep in touch. And thank you for your time. And can
yeah.
people look you up somewhere, find you out there? Or
I've dabbled across, probably all the social medias over my life, but as I've gotten older, I've really anchored to LinkedIn
okay,
mostly. And so you mentioned that kind of at the beginning. So you can look me up there, Dylan White. I try to be active with some posts. I try to keep them insightful and I try to keep them real, most importantly.
hmm,
Um, and yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with you on there and look me up.
look them up. The posts are real. It's the reason I'm here, Dylan. I've met you in person several times years ago, but I've read your posts. They're interesting. They're real. They're authentic. And I know you're a gifted presenter too. So check Dylan out. And thanks again, Dylan. We're gonna
Yeah,
sign
my
off for now.
pleasure, Tom.
Okay.